Hi, I'm Dan.
And I'm Leslie.
And welcome back to Addicted to the Mouse. Thank you so much for joining us again on our journey towards financial independence to travel. Please like and subscribe.
Today we are going to talk about what is FIRE. FIRE is an acronym that stands for Financial Independence Retire Early.
That's right. It's really broken down into two pieces though. The financial independence piece, which is what we are primarily focused on, and the retire early, which often gets confused, but we'll get more into that later.
Whenever you think of retirement, you think that you're going to be working until you're in your 50s or 60s, sometimes even into your 70s. I mean, we all hope that we're going to retire by 62, 65. But the whole idea of financial independence, retire early, the FIRE movement, started with Vicki Robin's book, Your Money or Your Life, back in 1992.
And more recently, it's become very popularized by a blog called Mr. Money Mustache that has something like 7 million monthly page views. It's a great blog. You go to the homepage, there is a button that says Start Here, and if you want to start learning about the FIRE movement, that is a fantastic place to start. The first step to determining if FIRE is right for you is to figure out your why. Just because you want to quit your job is not a great reason to go into this movement.
Right, so we started talking a lot about how much we desired traveling, as we kind of mentioned in our previous video, and that combined with wanting our children to see the world and experience different cultures, and for us to really experience different cultures, really became our why and the reason that we started this movement.
It's funny because I read somewhere recently that it is the majority of Americans in particular don't have $400 that they can come up with to cover an emergency expense. And it's becoming pretty stressful, as you can imagine. That's not what we get stressed out about. What we get stressed out about, at least what I get stressed out about, is time. So this goes back to that book, Your Money or Your Life, where Vicki Robin ties in the most precious resource. Time is what you're trying to get back. And so as soon as you become financially independent and you retire, whether that means that you continue working or not, figuring out what your why is allows you that time back.
Exactly. So even if you are one of those people that gets stressed out about an emergency $400 payment, and you may not have that and extra savings and such, that doesn't mean that you can't go down this path and you can't experience this journey. It just might take a little bit longer for you than it might take for someone else.
So another key principle of the FIRE movement is that really anyone can do this. Now, to be fair, you do have to be privileged enough to make an income that covers your monthly expenses.
Right, so anybody with any amount of income can do this as long as you have some money left over after you pay your monthly expenses.
The FIRE movement focuses on a very, very simple math problem, and it is what you make, or your income, minus what you spend, or your expenses, and that equals your savings, the difference between the two. And the whole idea is to take those two things, income and your expenses, and to put as much space between them as possible, and that becomes your savings rate. The higher you save, the higher your savings rate is, the faster you can reach financial independence.
The kind of general idea that most people have is to save about 10 to 15% towards retirement. But with this FIRE movement, the notion is to get anywhere from 50% of savings and above.
Yes, and that's pretty tough for a lot of people when you think of your savings rate being 50% or more of your income. And that's what we're struggling with right now. So we have always been of the mindset 10 to 15%, that'll set us up for retirement, work 40 some odd years and retire somewhere around the age of 63, 65. It makes sense in theory if you want to work that long, but again, it comes back to time. We all have the same 168 hours a week. A third of that, at least for us, is dedicated to sleeping, and a third of that is dedicated to this 9-to-5 job that we go to. So once we get that back, we have all kinds of time that we can do whatever we want to, and that leads us back to our why, which is travel, and that's what we want to do with that extra time.
So once you figure out your why, you have to decide how much money you're going to spend in retirement.
So the FIRE movement is basically a math problem, and that math problem comes from what is termed the Trinity study. The Trinity study is a paper that was published in 1998 from 3 professors working at Trinity University. The whole premise of the paper centers around a math problem that states if you save 25 times your annual expenses, that gives you your financial independence number. Because you can safely withdraw 4%, so that's the reverse of 25 times is 4%. You can safely withdraw 4% every year and not go broke, essentially.
So if we put that in numbers, a lot of times people will use like $40,000 a year as your annual expenses. So if you multiply that by 25, that means that you need $1 million before you can retire.
Right, and the flip side of that is if you take $1 million and you multiply that by 4%, it gives you $40,000 a year.
Now that sounds like a lot of money, and it is a lot of money, right? So to make it seem less overwhelming, one way to look at it is that if you can save an extra $100 a month, whether that is by stretching out your hair appointments a little more often, or not getting your nails done, or maybe starting to take your lunch to work, however that looks for you, if you can save $100 a month, that's $1,200 a year, and if you multiply that by 25, that's $30,000 that you can shave off of that number that you need to save.
That's right. So it all comes back to that equation where income minus expenses equals your savings. And the more distance you can put between income and expenses, the less time it will take to reach your FI number. So a number of things are likely to change from working life to financial independent retired early life. For instance, we have kids. We have a 13-year-old and an 8-year-old son, and they cost money. And so I guarantee you in 5 years, that 13-year-old is not going to be on our payroll anymore. So that will definitely change how much we spend every month during our financial independence.
And it really depends on where you want to live after you retire. So there are a lot of less expensive places than America to live in retirement. And so if you're going to pick one of those less expensive places, you're not going to need as much money.
That's absolutely right. That's called geographic arbitrage, and we will talk about that in a future video. Also, things are likely to change because you have a lot of time now. We know we want that time back, and with that time we can do things that maybe we've hired people or outsourced people to do in the past. For instance, cleaning our house. We don't do that anymore, but we were guilty of that in the past. We just didn't have the energy and the time after we worked so much and dealt with kids and activities. Maybe for you, it's having someone mow your grass, or maybe it's having someone clean the pool. Whatever it is, you can do that stuff yourself now.
So now that you have that number, take that number, multiply it by 25. This is that Trinity study that Dan mentioned earlier, and that number is your FI. That is your number that you have to get to become financially independent.
So once you have your FI number, you have to figure out where you're going to get income during your retirement. So one way is through active income, actively earning. So actively earning or active income is basically going out and getting a part-time job or maybe creating a side hustle. We've created a couple of side hustles that we will definitely continue into retirement. Leslie is a travel agent, and she definitely wants to continue that into retirement.
Right, so another way is passive income. So this can come from dividends that from your investments that you've made. It can also come if you've decided to purchase a rental property, and so the income that you get off of that. And it could come from things like Dan wrote a book, and so that's currently a source of passive income for us. He wrote a book over facility management, and we make money on that every month.
Another form of income might be pensions. Maybe you've been in the military and retired, or maybe you've been a public servant and retired. At 59 and a half, your tax-advantaged accounts come into play. You can start taking withdrawals from them. And Social Security, in some form of fashion, will probably be around, so that will come into play some. So this is a great place to point out that there are several different types of FIRE. So normal FIRE assumes that you are going to make all of your money off of passive income investing in low-cost index funds. You can also be lean fire, which means you're going to be extremely frugal in your spending and your expenses are going to be very, very low so that you don't have to save up. Your FI number is not as big as normal fire. The opposite of that is fat fire, which those are for the people that want to spend a lot of money and really live it up in retirement. And it's the opposite of lean fire. It's you save up a much larger FI number, more like 2.5 million versus 1 million, so that you can have the nicer things in life in retirement. And then finally, there is barista fire, which is what we're going to do, and that is something as a combination of financial independence and then working and making money through side hustles.
All right, so now you know how much you need in retirement and where that money is going to come from. So let's talk about budgets.
Oh, yeah, let's talk about budgets. All right, budgets. You have to spend less than you make. That should be obvious by this point in the video. What isn't quite so obvious is that you need to pay yourself first. You have to save. You have to get your savings rate up because traditional fire, the savings rate is a lot higher, about 50% or more than a savings rate of a traditional retiree, somebody that wants to retire around 60 or 65. That traditional savings rate is more like 10 to 15%. That's where we were before we started researching this. And we are gradually trying to build our savings rate. So we are getting closer and closer to that 50% number, and that is where we want to be.
So you've decided on your budget, and the only way to stick to something is if you track it. My suggestion is to create a spreadsheet. I kind of like spreadsheets, and so does he. We're a little bit dorky in that fashion, but it's a must. You have to track every single dollar that comes in and goes out in order to fully assess your annual expenses and income.
You'll be shocked at where some of your money goes. We definitely were. So when you're looking at your budget, consider cutting as many expenses as you can, things that you maybe don't need. And as you track those expenses, ask yourself if it is something that brings a lot of value or if it's something that's important to you.
It's really interesting because after listening to the Your Money or Your Life book, we listened to the audiobook of that, it put a whole new perspective on every time I went to purchase something, I thought in my head, is this something that is worth me working longer for? Is this something that I really want to spend extra time and sacrifice extra time in my life in order to purchase?
As you're looking at expenses to cut, a lot of people talk about cutting out the latte factor. So if something that you love to do is getting that latte from Starbucks every morning before work, then, that can save some money. However, we suggest to look at your biggest ticket items first, and that's generally housing, transportation, and food, and figure out how to cut those. Those will make such a much bigger difference on your savings rate. For us, we are selling our house. We hope to get a house that is half of what we currently pay. Half for utilities, half on the housing cost. We will save a ton of money that way. We just paid off Leslie's car, so that really lowers our transportation costs. And food?
So food, we have a dry erase board on the side of our refrigerator that anybody in the family can write everything that they want to be purchased at the grocery store. And my habit before we started this movement was to order everything that was on there. It did not matter how much it was, I just ordered it because somebody in the family wanted it. And so our weekly grocery bill was about $250 a week for the four of us. I have managed now that I pay attention to every single thing that I put in our grocery cart. I have managed to get that down to about between $100 and $120 a week. So another way to help your budget is to think outside the box. And I think we're gonna dive more into this in future videos, but one thing that we have decided to do is that prior to our fit movement, Dan would get his hair cut every 2 weeks. And so he has started stretching that out to every 3 weeks. And then I would get my hair colored and cut every 6 to 7 weeks, and I'm starting to stretch that out to every 8 weeks. So while it doesn't seem like it was something that obviously we can't sacrifice haircuts altogether, and I'm not willing to sacrifice coloring my hair quite yet, it was a way that we could compromise and be able to save in the overall budget.
everything that we've mentioned so far centers around the math behind the FIRE movement. And while that is probably the most important part, that is your blueprint for success, something should be said to the emotional parts of the FIRE movement, especially if your goal is to quit your 9-to-5. Some people, once they are financially independent, don't want to quit. They just continue working their 9-to-5, and that is great for them. We want to travel more, so that is not going to result in working the traditional 9-to-5. So emotionally, it becomes, so we've heard, it becomes very, very hard, or it can be very, very hard, right before you quit your job to let go. And a lot of that centers around fear. And what we've told ourselves a lot recently is that why be afraid? We've done the math, we know it makes sense, we have studied it, we have prepared for it, and what is the worst that can happen? Well, the worst that can happen is that you have to go back to work.
Right, you have to go back to that 9-to-5. And if that's the worst thing that can happen in all of this, then let's just hold on and go for the ride.
That's right.
I would love to share this quote with you because I think this is really inspiring. This is from Tanya Hester, the author of Work Optional, Retire the Non-Penny Pinching Way. And she says, financial independence ultimately means that you can shape your life without taking money into consideration. I think that's such a powerful quote because that's our goal. We don't want money to shape the way we are living.
All right, it's been crazy. Our camera has been malfunctioning all night. I don't know if you can tell that we started with daylight outside and now we've got darkness. So just for that, hit that thumbs up button, please. So, we're here.
Sorry. We've done it too many times.